Right now, in Seoul, South Korea, there are teenagers sitting in these brightly lit private academies at like 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, yeah.
And they are furiously drilling calculus and vocabulary, literally trying to secure their entire future on a single test. But then meanwhile, you have a teenager of the exact same age in Helsinki, Finland, who is probably asleep or, reading a book for pleasure.
Right, because they've never taken a high-stakes standardized test in their entire life.
Exactly. And both of these kids are going to grow up and enter the exact same global economy, but their brains are being wired in fundamentally, radically different ways.
That's fascinating.
Right. We look at a person's career or their vocabulary or their success, but we so rarely examine the massive invisible architecture that actually built them.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate invisible scaffolding of society.
Mm-hmm.
The way a country decides to educate its youth, it tells you exactly what that society prioritizes, what it fears, and what it believes human potential actually looks like.
Hello, and welcome to the Deep Dive. I am so glad you are here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, always. So if you are new to the show, what we do is we take a stack of material, so articles, transcripts, research, and we extract the vital nuggets of insight to give you a shortcut to being incredibly well-informed.
Which is definitely what we're doing today.
For sure. Today, we are tearing down that invisible architecture of global education. We are looking at this incredibly fascinating collection of transcripts, and oddly enough, it originates from an English language testing tool.
Yeah, of all places.
Right. It's a video called 30-Minute IELTS Listening Practice, Education, and Student Life from Learn English Lab.
Which is brilliant in its own right, honestly.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it's literally just designed to test whether a non-native speaker can comprehend, complex English audio.
Right.
But when you strip away the testing format and actually look at the content, the text itself, it is a Trojan horse. It is this dense, highly articulate masterclass in the sociology of learning.
And just to be totally clear, our mission today is not to prep you for an English exam.
No, not at all.
No. Our goal is to take this material and unpack how global society structures learning. We're going to explore the competing philosophies of education worldwide, the brutal reality of the modern student experience, and really the friction that happens when different cultures collide in a classroom.
Exactly. We want to arm you with the precise vocabulary and the analytical frameworks to actually articulate these massive ideas in your own life.
Because whether you are a student, a parent, a hiring manager, or honestly just someone trying to understand why your coworker from Germany approaches a problem totally differently than your coworker from Japan, you are interacting with the ghosts of your educational frameworks every single day.
You really are. It's everywhere.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because where the material starts is, well, it's truly foundational. We tend to think of school as just a natural phenomenon.
Right, like gravity or the weather.
Yeah, you turn 5, you go to a building with small chairs, you learn to read. But the primary point made right out of the gate here is that these education systems are entirely engineered. Like they are deliberate, calculated choices.
Yeah, the very first conceptual hurdle we have to clear is shedding the idea that school is just school.
Right.
The way a country handles a child's journey from, say, roughly age 5 to 18 is a direct mirror of its economic strategy.
Mm-hmm.
For those first few years, the foundational years, the baseline is somewhat universal globally. It's literacy, numeracy, figuring out how to sit still and cooperate with other kids.
Please stop eating the glue, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But the moment a child hits secondary education, the architecture just fractures into wildly different paths depending on what the nation's goals actually are.
So let's break down the mechanics of those paths, because the material gives us this contrast between the United Kingdom and the United States, which is basically a perfect starting point. The structural milestones are completely different.
Absolutely.
In the UK, the journey is organized into these specific, really rigid blocks called key stages. And then right around age 16, you hit a massive wall. The GCSEs.
Right, the General Certificate of Secondary Education. This is a public standardized exam, and it is not just a polite checkpoint to see how you are doing.
Right, it's not a pop quiz.
No. It is a highly consequential filtering mechanism. If you fail to achieve certain grades on your GCSEs at 16, you are largely locked out of taking A-levels.
Wow.
Which means you are locked out of the traditional university route. Your academic trajectory is essentially crystallized before you even get your driver's license.
See, that is wild to me. It's just a massive bottleneck. I mean, at 16, your brain is barely fully formed.
Barely.
You're dealing with hormones and high school drama, and your performance on a set of exams in a sweaty gymnasium literally dictates your socioeconomic trajectory for the next 20 years.
It's intense.
And then you contrast that with the U.S. system, which the material also outlines. In the U.S., you basically flow from elementary to middle to high school.
Yeah, it's a very different vibe.
Right. You are just accumulating credits over 4 years to get a high school diploma at 18. There is no federally mandated high-stakes exit exam at 16 that sorts you into, like, university material or not.
Right. The U.S. system operates on this philosophy of delayed specialization. It's an open-ended funnel.
Right.
The underlying belief is that you keep everyone on roughly the same general track for as long as possible. You give the late bloomers time to catch up.
Which sounds great in theory.
It does, but there is a major critique of this too. By keeping everyone together and actively avoiding that harsh 16-year-old checkpoint, you risk lowering the overall rigor.
Ah.
Yeah, you end up with students graduating at 18 who still read at a middle school level just because the system values pushing them through to the diploma over enforcing strict academic checkpoints.
It's basically like an open world video game. Everyone is just generally leveling up their stats, wandering around the map until the very end of the main quest line at graduation.
That's a really good analogy.
But then we look at Germany, and this is where the architecture literally forces your hand incredibly early.
Yeah, the German system is the ultimate example of state-engineered tracking. And they don't wait until you are 16.
Oh, I know. This part is crazy.
In many German states, students are channeled into totally different secondary tracks around age 10 or 12.
Wait, hold on. Sorting 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
That sounds, frankly, terrifyingly dystopian. Like, how does a teacher or a whole system look at a 10-year-old and basically decide their fate?
I mean, it definitely sounds jarring to an American or British ear, absolutely. The mechanism usually involves a combination of the student's grades in primary school, teacher recommendations, and consultations with the parents.
Okay, so it's not just a blind sorting hack.
No. They evaluate the child's academic aptitude and learning style. And based on that, the paths split. On one side, you have the gymnasium track.
Right, which is the academic one.
Exactly. This is highly theoretical, very rigorous, and it is explicitly geared toward preparing students for the Abitur exams and university entrance. And the other side is the vocational track. So this includes schools like the Realschule or Hauptschule. These focus much more on practical applied knowledge.
Okay.
They are actively preparing students to enter Germany's famous dual vocational training system, the Ausbildung, where you actually split your time between a classroom and a real apprenticeship in a company.
So going back to my video game analogy, Germany isn't an open world game at all. It's a game that forces you to pick your character, class-like wizard, warrior, builder in the first 5 minutes of gameplay.
Right.
And you are completely locked into that skill tree. But my immediate pushback on that is, well, doesn't this create a massive societal caste system?
It's a common fear, yeah.
Because if you put a kid in the vocational track at age 10, aren't you just permanently labeling them as not smart enough for college?
Well, what's fascinating here is that to understand why it actually works in Germany, you really have to understand the German economy and their cultural mindset.
Oh,
So in a lot of Western countries, there is this deep, entrenched stigma against vocational labor. We tell kids, if you don't go to college, you'll end up fixing pipes.
yeah, it's used as a threat.
Exactly. But in Germany, fixing pipes is an incredibly respected, highly regulated, and lucrative profession. The trades are governed by these strict guilds. You become an apprentice, then a journeyman, and eventually a meister.
A master craftsman.
Right.
A title that actually commands real societal respect over there.
Precisely. So the German system isn't about separating the smart kids from the dumb kids.
Yeah.
It's a society explicitly saying, look, we need world-class engineers, yes, but we also crucially need world-class electricians, precision machinists, and healthcare technicians to keep our whole export economy running.
Right.
By building a formal, heavily funded state track for vocational trades, they are signaling that these paths are different, but they are equally valued.
Equally valued. That really is the linchpin of the whole thing. If the jobs waiting at the end of the vocational track pay well and carry dignity, then early tracking isn't a punishment, it's just efficient routing.
Exactly.
But let's pan the camera out even further here. We've talked about structures, right? The actual physical sorting of students. But the material also dives deep into the underlying psychology of how different countries actually teach.
The pedagogical approach.
Right, the pedagogical approach. And they juxtapose Japan and Finland, which honestly feels like looking at two different planets.
Oh, it really is the starkest contrast in modern educational philosophy. So the Japanese system, historically and currently, is heavily exam-driven.
Right.
The mechanism of success is the university entrance exam. Corporate hiring in Japan is incredibly rigid, so top companies recruit almost exclusively from top universities.
So it's an intense funnel.
Extremely intense. Therefore, the pressure to get into those specific universities trickles all the way down to elementary school. It creates this environment of intense rote memorization, discipline, and standardized testing.
Hence the high scores. I mean, if you drill the test for 12 years, you are obviously going to crush international math and science rankings.
They do. Statistically, Japan produces phenomenal aggregate academic results.
Yeah.
But the cost is the psychological toll on the student. It breeds uniformity and often just intense anxiety.
Right.
Now, shift your view to Finland. Finland completely dismantled that model. They have virtually no standardized testing until the very end of high school. They have shorter school days. They assign very little homework.
Okay, I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because this always comes up. The Finnish miracle.
Yeah.
It sounds completely utopian. No tests, short days, no homework. If I pitched that to a school board in New York or London, they would literally laugh me out of the room.
Oh, they'd think you were crazy.
Right. They'd say the kids would learn absolutely nothing. So how does Finland avoid total academic collapse? What is the actual mechanism making this work behind the scenes?
So the secret engine of the Finnish system isn't just, doing less work. It is the extreme professionalization of the teacher.
Oh.
In Finland, teaching is one of the most highly respected and difficult professions to enter. Every teacher must hold a master's degree, and the acceptance rate into teaching programs is brutally low.
It's like how low?
Often around 10%. They only take the absolute top tier of graduates.
Wow. So it's basically like applying to medical school.
Exactly. Because the selection process is so incredibly rigorous, the state deeply trusts the teachers. They don't need a standardized test from the government to tell them if a student is learning.
They just trust the person in the room.
Yes. They trust the highly trained expert in the room to assess the child. This is what we call teacher autonomy. The teacher designs the curriculum to fit the specific kids in front of them.
Right.
The pedagogical approach is fundamentally student-centered. It focuses on holistic development, social skills, emotional regulation, creative problem solving, rather than just cramming facts for a test.
Okay, so the trade-off is pretty clear. Japan leverages rigorous, standardized pressure to guarantee a high baseline of academic performance, but they trade away some student well-being and individuality.
Correct.
And then Finland leverages highly elite teacher training to foster well-being and creative flexibility, but they basically trade away the easily measurable uniform data of standardized tests.
You nailed it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly why vocabulary matters. When you are sitting in a boardroom debating how to train your employees or even looking at school districts for your own kids, you aren't just talking about vibes.
Right. It's not just a feeling.
No, you are actively debating the pedagogical approach. You are deciding if you want a system built on rigid educational frameworks or flexible holistic development.
But here's the brutal irony of all this, right? Whether you come up through the intense exam pressure cooker of Japan, or the nurturing autonomous classrooms of Finland, or the open world high schools of the US, almost every single one of those students is eventually funneled into the exact same massive life-altering bottleneck.
Higher education. The transition into bachelor's, master's, and doctorates.
Exactly. And this brings us to the second major theme we really have to explore today, the higher education gamble.
Right, because universities are just no longer these quiet centers of advanced thought. They are the epicenter of a massive global crisis regarding cost, access, and return on investment. We are moving from education as a universal right, which most countries generally agree primary school is, into education as an arena of intense specialization and intense financial friction.
Massive friction.
The material uses the United States as the prime example of the private investment model. And the numbers they pull are staggering. We're looking at private universities where tuition alone can easily exceed $50,000 a year.
Let's just freeze on that number for a second. $50,000 a year. That is $200,000 for a 4-year degree, just for the privilege of sitting in the lectures.
Yeah.
That does not include housing, food, textbooks, or, I don't know, breathing air in a major city. How on earth did the architecture of American education arrive at a price tag that literally rivals buying a house?
It really comes down to the underlying philosophy. The U.S. system largely treats higher education as a private individual investment. The logic is, look, you, the student, are going to get a degree in engineering or business. You are going to use that degree to earn a much higher salary over your lifetime. Therefore, you should bear the cost of acquiring it.
Right.
And to facilitate this, the government created a massive system of federal student loans.
Ah, and there is the mechanism. If literally any 18-year-old can theoretically secure a massive loan guaranteed by the government, the universities realize that the student's actual ability to pay up front is no longer a constraint.
Precisely. It creates an arms race.
Right.
Universities aren't competing purely on academic rigor anymore. They're competing for enrollment. So they build state-of-the-art recreation centers, massive luxury dormitories, and they hire layers upon layers of administrative staff.
And the costs just skyrocket.
Exactly, because the federal loan system artificially inflates the purchasing power of the teenager. The result is a system that creates massive socioeconomic barriers.
Yeah.
Even with loans, a low-income student is taking on a paralyzing amount of debt, often $100,000 or more, before they even collect their very first paycheck. It radically alters their life choices.
Totally. You can't exactly take a risk and start a business or take a low-paying job at a nonprofit if you have a $1,000 a month loan payment hanging over your head.
Right.
It forces you into corporate optimization immediately. But then the material flips the globe again and looks at Germany. And Germany's approach to higher education sounds like actual fiction to an American ear.
It really does. In Germany, public university tuition is essentially free.
Wow.
Or it costs a nominal administrative fee of like a few hundred euros a semester. And this applies not just to German citizens, but often to international students as well.
I mean, I understand subsidizing your own citizens, but why would the German taxpayer voluntarily fund the education of a 22-year-old from Brazil or India? What is the actual mechanism there? Is it just post-war guilt and pure altruism?
No. It is a highly calculated macroeconomic strategy. Germany is facing a severe demographic collapse.
Okay.
They have an aging population and a massive shortage of highly skilled labor-so engineers, software developers, medical professionals.
Right.
By offering free, world-class education in English and German, they act as a magnet for top-tier global talent. They bring brilliant young minds into the country, integrate them into the culture for 3 or 4 years, and bet that a large percentage of them will just fall in love with the country, get a job, stay, and pay taxes for the next 40 years.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. It's basically an immigration strategy disguised as an education policy.
Exactly.
It's a customer acquisition cost. They spend 30,000 euros educating the student, and they get €1 million in tax revenue over the person's career.
It's a brilliant long-term investment.
So we have these two totally opposing views. Education as a private commodity you buy versus education as a public good the state subsidizes for societal benefit.
Which forces us into one of the most hotly contested policy debates today. Should higher education be free for all?
So let's weigh this out impartially, because to truly understand a system, you have to be able to argue both sides, right?
Absolutely.
The pro side of free higher education is incredibly compelling. You instantly tear down the socioeconomic wall. A brilliant kid from a poverty-stricken neighborhood has the exact same access to a medical degree as a billionaire's kid. You promote true meritocracy.
Right.
And macroeconomically, you produce a highly educated workforce that isn't burdened by debt, meaning they can immediately buy homes, start families, and actually stimulate the economy.
Those are the undeniable benefits. However, a rigorous analysis must look at the structural trade-offs.
Okay.
If tuition is free, the university relies entirely on government funding, and governments have fixed budgets. Every $1 billion spent subsidizing college is $1 billion not spent on universal health care, public transit, or even primary education.
It is literally a zero-sum game.
Yes. Furthermore, if you make it completely free and open, you risk stretching the resources incredibly thin. You end up with overcrowded lecture halls of 500 students, outdated lab equipment, and vastly underpaid adjunct professors.
Yeah.
Finally, there is the inflation of credentials. If everyone has a bachelor's degree just because it's free, the degree loses its premium signaling value to employers.
Right, because then a master's degree just becomes the new baseline.
Exactly, pushing the goalposts even further away.
Which is exactly why I get so fired up when the material introduces alternative pathways. Because the entire debate over who pays for university rests on this weird assumption that a university degree is the only valid ticket to a good life.
Yeah.
And that is a crumbling narrative.
Completely crumbling. The material highlights vocational training and apprenticeships again, but specifically calling out Australia's TAV system.
Technical and further education.
Right. These institutes are intensely focused on practical, hands-on skills, cybersecurity, culinary arts, advanced manufacturing, nursing.
And crucially, these aren't viewed as backup plans. They are highly respected pathways with direct pipelines to actual employers.
Yes.
But the biggest disruption to the university monopoly isn't physical vocational schools anyway, it is the internet. It's the explosion of platforms like Coursera, ADX, and these specialized coding boot camps.
This raises a really important question about the fundamental value of a degree. For centuries, a university degree was basically a proxy for competence. An employer looked at a Harvard or Oxford degree and assumed, okay, this person is smart and hardworking.
Right, it was a filter.
Exactly. But today, an employer can look at a candidate's GitHub portfolio or their specific data science certification from Coursera and know exactly what technical skills they possess right now.
This is exactly what I want to push on, because we talk about academic rigor versus practical expertise. Do you think the traditional four-year degree is actually losing its premium? Like, if I am a hiring manager at a tech firm, do I really care if an applicant spent 4 years writing essays on 19th century literature? Or do I want the person who just spent 6 months in a grueling online boot camp learning the exact coding language my company uses today?
That is the existential threat to traditional universities.
Yeah.
The university argues that they teach you how to think, right? Broad adaptability, long-term critical thinking, and social networking. The online bootcamp teaches you how to do a specific task right now.
Right.
For a long time, the broad adaptability was way more valued. But in an economy where technical skills become obsolete every 3 years, the ability to rapidly acquire a specific, immediate skill online is becoming massively valuable. The market is fracturing. The monopoly on prestige is just breaking.
But here's the reality check. Whether you take out $100,000 in debt to go to a U.S. college, or you move to Munich for free tuition, or you just lock yourself in your bedroom to take an intensive online tech course, you eventually have to face the day-to-day reality of the work. You actually have to survive the crucible of being a student.
Which shifts our focus from the macro architecture of policy right down to the ground-level human experience.
Exactly.
The psychological and physical toll of learning.
The crucible. Because the source material really does not sugarcoat this. It paints a picture of a life basically fraught with overlapping hurdles: academic, financial, social, and emotional.
Yeah, it's intense.
Let's start with the academic pressure, because the material brings us back to South Korea for just a harrowing look at burnout.
We mentioned the high-stakes exams earlier, but let's look at the daily reality of that. The material discusses the phenomena of hagwons. These are private, for-profit, after-school academies.
Okay, so you finish your regular school day at, 3 or 4 p.m. You are already tired. What happens next?
For a huge percentage of South Korean students, the day is literally just beginning. They transition to these hagwons, where they will spend the next 5, 6, or 7 hours in intensive supplementary instruction.
7 hours.
Yeah. They're drilling past exam papers, memorizing vocabulary, perfecting formulas. They might not get home until midnight. They sleep for 5 hours, wake up, and just do it again.
That is basically sleep deprivation as a state-sanctioned lifestyle.
It really is.
You picture a 14-year-old under fluorescent lights at 11:30 p.m. drinking caffeine, knowing that their score on the Suneung, the National College Entrance Exam, will literally dictate which companies will even look at their resume in 10 years.
Yeah.
The stress must be catastrophic.
It is. The psychological fallout is severe. South Korea struggles with profound rates of adolescent depression and burnout. It is the dark side of their economic miracle.
Man.
And it really underscores a concept the material highlights, which is the desperate need for holistic assessment.
Right.
When a society evaluates a human being's worth based on a single numerical score on a single day, it basically strips away their humanity. Holistic assessment argues that we must evaluate a student's creativity, their ability to collaborate, their resilience, and their emotional intelligence. But those things are messy. They're super hard to measure on a spreadsheet, so massive bureaucratic systems just ignore them.
So you have this crushing academic pressure. Now, let's layer financial terror on top of it, because the material gives us the specific example of an international student studying in the United Kingdom.
The financial mechanics for an international student are brutal. Domestic students in the UK have their tuition capped by the government. International students do not.
Right.
They are essentially subsidizing the university. An international student might face tuition fees of £20,000 to £25,000 a year.
And pounds are heavy. Depending on where the student is from, say, Nigeria or India, the exchange rate alone can mean their entire extended family has pooled their life savings to send this one kid to London.
Exactly. And £25,000 is just the tuition. Now you have to pay rent in London, which is one of the most expensive real estate markets on earth. You have to buy groceries, pay for the tube. The financial strain is suffocating.
So what is the survival mechanism? They get a job, they work 20 hours a week at a pub or a retail store.
Right.
And the material is very fair here, actually. It points out that this teaches incredible life skills. You learn budgeting, time management, and just raw resilience. You learn how to deal with angry customers, which is an education in itself.
It is. But the shadow side is the concept of cognitive load.
Okay, unpack that.
Your brain only has so much processing power. Every hour a student spends pouring pints at a pub, worrying if they have enough money to make rent next Tuesday, is an hour their brain is not processing their organic chemistry lecture.
Oh, wow.
Financial stress literally cannibalizes cognitive bandwidth. It creates a system where the wealthy student can study for 10 hours and the working student can only study for 4, widening the achievement gap purely based on capital, not intelligence.
It's a rigged race. And if the academic burnout and the financial terror weren't enough, we have to talk about the social and emotional isolation, because the material provides a really empathetic scenario about cultural shock.
They describe a hypothetical Chinese student who travels to an American university. Now, academically, this student is a powerhouse. Their academic English is flawless.
Right.
They can read a dense textbook on macroeconomics. They can write a 20-page research paper with perfect citations. They can comprehend a professor's formal lecture.
Right. They basically conquered the IELTS test. They are academically bulletproof.
Yeah.
But then the lecture ends and they walk out into the student union to get a coffee.
And suddenly, that flawless academic English is entirely useless. Because out in the hallway, nobody speaks in formal essays. The other students are speaking at rapid speed, using heavy regional slang, making sarcastic jokes, and referencing American pop culture that the international student has never even seen.
They completely miss the pragmatics of the language, the unspoken social rules. When an American says, yeah, right, they actually mean no.
Yeah.
When a Brit says, I'll look into it, they probably mean, I'm never going to do that.
Precisely. And this gap between academic fluency and social fluency creates profound isolation.
Yeah.
The student sits in the cafeteria surrounded by thousands of peers, but they feel completely alone because they cannot engage in the casual connective banter that forms friendships. It is a deep, emotional, cultural shock that can easily lead to depression, which then loops back and destroys their academic performance.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If you take all these factors, so the South Korean kid trying not to collapse at midnight, the international student pouring pints to make London rent, the emotional isolation of navigating an alien culture, the modern student experience feels less like an environment optimized for learning and more like an extreme endurance sport.
It's an exercise in survival.
Exactly. And the core survival skill the material points to isn't intelligence, it's time management.
The desperate juggling act. The modern student is forced to constantly multitask.
But we know multitasking is a biological myth.
Totally.
The human brain cannot actually focus on 2 complex tasks simultaneously. It just rapidly switches between them, draining energy every single time it switches.
Right.
So if our educational architecture requires a young person to constantly context switch just to survive the week, is the system fundamentally broken?
That is the exact critique many educational reformers are raising right now. When the cognitive load of merely surviving the logistics of the student experience outweighs the cognitive load of the actual curriculum, the system has lost its purpose.
Wow.
Students in this crucible desperately need a release valve. They need environments where they can decompress, build different kinds of skills, and connect socially without the pressure of a grade.
Which brings us perfectly to the concept of holistic development. We have to look outside the lecture hall. We have to look at the massive debate over extracurricular activities, basically what happens when the textbooks are closed.
Sports, clubs, societies, volunteering. Historically, these were seen as mere hobbies, but modern pedagogy recognizes them as critical environments for executive function training.
Right.
They teach skills that the formal classroom is just structurally incapable of teaching effectively.
So let's break down the actual mechanisms of these activities. Let's start with sports. Why does running around a field matter to a student's academic profile?
Well, on a purely biological level, physical exertion is the most effective way to process stress hormones like cortisol, which build up during intense academic study.
Okay, that makes sense.
But psychologically, team sports build discipline and resilience. In a classroom, failure means a bad grade, which feels totally permanent. On a sports field, failure means missing a shot or losing a game. You feel the sting, but then you shake hands, go to practice the next day, and try again. It teaches the brain that failure is an iterative process, not a terminal identity.
That is a really crucial distinction, learning how to lose. And it's not just physical sports. The material discusses debate clubs and drama societies. If you join a debate club, you aren't just learning public speaking. You are learning cognitive empathy. You are often forced to argue a side of an issue that you personally disagree with.
Right.
You literally have to inhabit the mind of your opponent, understand their logic, and articulate it clearly. In an increasingly polarized world, that might be the absolute most valuable skill a person can possess.
And a drama society fosters collaboration in a highly dynamic, unpredictable environment.
Yeah.
You are learning to read micro-expressions, coordinate timing with a group, and perform under the pressure of an audience. It builds deep emotional intelligence.
So the benefits of these clubs are really obvious, but then the material wades into a much more complex, controversial arena: community service and volunteering. Tutoring younger kids, serving at a soup kitchen, neighborhood cleanups.
The intention behind volunteering is to foster a sense of civic duty and social responsibility, to basically pull the student out of their own self-centered academic bubble and force them to engage with the actual needs of their local community.
It sounds noble.
It is. And this leads to a massive debate in educational circles. Should community service be compulsory? Should schools mandate that a student must complete, say, 50 hours of volunteer work in order to graduate?
See, I have serious pushback on this, but let's look at the argument for making it mandatory first.
Okay.
The logic is that teenagers are inherently self-absorbed, and if you don't force them to volunteer, they never will. By mandating it, you ensure that every single student experiences the act of giving back. You formally instill civic values into the curriculum, and you guarantee exposure to different socioeconomic realities.
It's basically the idea that action precedes feeling. You force the behavior, and the empathy will follow.
Right. But the counter-argument feels much truer to human nature, at least to me. Does forcing a student to volunteer fundamentally assassinate the genuine spirit of altruism?
Yeah.
If you hold a teenager's high school diploma hostage until they spend 20 hours picking up trash in a park, aren't you just teaching them bureaucratic compliance?
You might be.
It takes a beautiful act of human connection and turns it into a chore, right? A box to check. They aren't learning civic responsibility. They're learning how to jump through a hoop.
You're hitting on the core risk of extrinsic motivation. When you attach a mandatory reward or punishment to a moral act, you often destroy the intrinsic desire to do it.
Right.
The student isn't thinking, I am helping my community. They're thinking, I need to get this signature so I can graduate. The material suggests that a balanced approach might involve creating a culture of service within the school, providing massive opportunities and encouragement, but stopping short of actual coercion.
Yeah, let the student choose an issue they actually care about, whether that's animal rescue or coding websites for local charities.
Make it meaningful, not mandatory.
Exactly. But there is a danger lurking in all of this, whether it's sports, debate, or volunteering. And that is the absolute toxicity of the resume padding industrial complex.
Oh, the trap of overcommitment.
Yes. Because college admissions have become so hyper-competitive, teenagers know that a 4.0 GPA isn't enough anymore. Universities want well-rounded leaders. So what happens? The student joins 3 clubs, plays a varsity sport, plays the cello, and volunteers at the hospital on weekends.
And we arrived right back where we started when we talked about the crucible. Total academic burnout.
Yep.
By trying to optimize every waking hour for holistic development, they cannibalize the time they actually need to rest, reflect, and just be a human being. It becomes this vicious cycle of performative achievement.
It's exhausting just talking about it.
It really is.
So we have explored the physical spaces of learning, the classrooms, the sports fields, the community centers. But the concept of where a student learns and how they interact with information has recently been completely shattered. We cannot talk about modern education without dissecting the biggest disruptor since the printing press.
Technology, the digital disruption.
Yeah.
The integration of ed tech, educational technology, has been slowly building for 2 decades. But as the material highlights, it was violently accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
It was basically an involuntary, real-time global experiment. In a matter of weeks, the entire physical architecture of education shut down, and hundreds of millions of students were forced into digital spaces. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom.
Now, let's be precise here. What happened during the pandemic was not thoughtfully designed digital learning. It was emergency remote teaching.
Huge difference.
Exactly. But it forced society to evaluate the promises and the perils of digital education at scale. And the promises are genuinely revolutionary. Online platforms offer unprecedented flexibility. A student can learn at their own pace, rewinding a lecture if they didn't understand a concept.
The location independence is the biggest promise to me. Theoretically, a student living in a remote, underfunded village can access a masterclass in physics taught by a Nobel laureate at MIT.
Right.
The geographical lottery of birth no longer dictates the quality of information you can access. That is miraculous.
It is. But the perils proved to be devastating. The most immediate loss was face-to-face social interaction. As we just discussed regarding clubs and cultural shock, the pragmatic, unspoken social skills are primarily learned by sharing physical space with other humans.
Yeah.
You cannot learn to read body language or navigate complex group dynamics effectively through a grid of tiny video squares.
Right, let's freeze on a term that comes up a lot when people debate this. Digital pedagogy.
Oh, yeah.
Because that sounds like high-level corporate jargon. What does it actually mean in practice? Are we just talking about turning on a webcam?
No, and that is exactly the trap most schools fell into. Digital pedagogy is the specific methodology of teaching in a virtual environment.
Okay.
Taking a 45-minute lecture designed for physical room and simply broadcasting it over Zoom is terrible pedagogy. The medium changes the message. True digital pedagogy involves interactive polling, breakout rooms for micro-collaboration, asynchronous learning, where students absorb the lecture on their own time and use the live video session purely for debate and problem solving. Teachers had to learn an entirely new psychological approach to holding attention when they couldn't even make physical eye contact.
That makes a lot of sense. The tool is only as good as the technique.
Exactly.
But the most critical systemic peril the material focuses on isn't bad Zoom etiquette. It is the digital divide.
This is the crux of the whole issue. The digital divide refers to the stark inequality in access to reliable technology and high-speed internet. It is not just about whether a kid has a laptop. It's about whether they have broadband internet that doesn't drop every 5 minutes. It is about whether they have a quiet room in their house to study, or if they're sitting on a bed sharing a single hotspot with 3 siblings who are also trying to attend virtual school.
And the mechanism here is just brutal. If an education system becomes heavily reliant on digital platforms and a massive percentage of the population lacks the infrastructure to access those platforms, technology stops being an equalizer.
Right.
It becomes an accelerant for inequality. The wealthy kids with fiber optic internet and private tutors pull ahead exponentially faster, while the low-income kids are essentially locked out of the building.
Which means government policy cannot just focus on buying software. It has to focus on infrastructure.
Yeah.
Subsidizing broadband access must be treated as a fundamental educational necessity, much like providing electricity or heating to a physical school building.
I look at technology and education like a high-speed bullet train.
Okay.
It is this sleek, futuristic machine that can transport you further and faster than a horse-drawn carriage ever could. But that multi-billion-dollar train is absolutely useless to you if the government hasn't built a road for you to get to the station, or if you can't afford the ticket to stand on the platform.
That is a very accurate assessment of the infrastructure gap. But let's look at the students who actually are on the train.
Okay.
The material pushes past Zoom and looks into the near future at the integration of immersive technologies, specifically virtual reality and artificial intelligence.
This is where we cross into literal science fiction. How does VR actually change the mechanics of learning?
VR fundamentally changes spatial and experiential learning. So imagine a high school history class studying ancient Rome.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at a 2D map in a textbook, the students put on headsets and virtually walk through a one-to-one scale recreation of the Colosseum. They can see the scale, hear the simulated crowd, and understand the architecture intuitively.
That is amazing.
In medical school, the applications are even more profound. A student can practice a complex, delicate surgical procedure on a virtual human body 100 times, making mistakes in a zero-risk environment before they ever touch a living patient.
It turns abstract information into visceral memory. I love that. But AI is the one that really shakes the foundations. The dream of the personalized AI tutor.
Exactly. Educational psychologists talk about the zone of proximal development.
What's that?
It's that sweet spot where a task is just hard enough to challenge a student, but not so hard that they give up. In a classroom of 30 kids, a human teacher can rarely keep everyone in that zone.
It's impossible.
But an AI tutor can. It constantly analyzes the student's inputs. If the student breezes through 3 algebra questions, the AI instantly dials up the difficulty. If the student hesitates or makes a specific type of error, the AI instantly recognizes the misunderstanding and provides a custom micro lesson to correct it, pacing the learning perfectly to that individual's brain.
It's the ultimate tutor. But here is my deepest fear about this.
Yeah.
If we surround students with AI tutors that instantly provide customized answers and search engines that retrieve any historical fact in a millisecond, do we risk degrading their ability to engage in deep, sustained critical thinking? Like, if the machine does the heavy lifting of synthesizing information and structuring arguments, do our own cognitive muscles atrophy? We are basically outsourcing our memory and our logic to the server farm.
It is the modern version of the calculator debate.
Right.
When pocket calculators were introduced, math teachers panicked, saying students would lose the ability to do arithmetic. And, to some extent, they did. Most adults today cannot quickly do long division on paper.
Guilty.
Right. But the calculator freed up cognitive bandwidth to focus on higher-level mathematics, like calculus and physics. The optimistic view of AI is that by outsourcing the synthesis of basic facts, humans will elevate their focus to complex problem-solving, ethical judgments, and creative leaps that AI cannot make.
The pessimistic view is that we just become passive consumers of AI-generated consensus. It's a massive tightrope walk. But there is a secondary effect of this digital explosion that the material brings up. Because technology allows a curriculum to be instantly beamed anywhere on the globe, it is forcing a massive collision of cultural values. We are being forced to confront the underlying philosophical differences in how different societies define knowledge itself.
Which brings us to Section 6 of our deep dive, Global Philosophies and the Tension of Standardization. The material provides a broad but highly useful synthesis contrasting Western versus Eastern educational paradigms.
So let's unpack the mechanisms of these philosophies, because they didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? They are rooted in centuries of cultural history. Let's start with the Western model.
The Western educational philosophy, often typified by systems in the US, the UK, and parts of Europe, is deeply rooted in the Socratic method.
Okay.
The fundamental mechanism of learning is questioning. The system historically prioritizes student autonomy, debate, and independent critical thought. A student is often rewarded for challenging the professor or finding a novel, creative way to solve a problem, even if it deviates from the standard formula.
Right.
The ultimate goal is to foster innovation and individual expression.
Question everything. That is the cultural bedrock. Now contrast that with the Eastern systems mentioned in the material, historically referencing China or India.
The Eastern paradigms have historically been influenced by different philosophical bedrock, such as Confucianism. In these models, there is a profound respect for the teacher as the absolute authority and transmitter of wisdom.
Right.
The fundamental mechanism of learning is mastery of the foundation. The focus is on rigorous discipline, deep memorization, and absorbing the accumulated knowledge of the past.
It's the idea that you have to master the rules perfectly before you are actually allowed to break them.
Yeah.
You can't innovate if you don't have a rock-solid foundation of facts.
Exactly. Western observers sometimes dismiss this as rote learning, but that completely misunderstands the goal. The goal is deep internalization.
Yeah.
The Eastern model is credited with producing incredible consistency, an unmatched societal work ethic, and phenomenal baseline competence in STEM fields. The Western model claims to produce the disruptive innovators who invent new industries.
Obviously, the Holy Grail is a hybrid approach. You want the discipline and deep foundational knowledge of the East combined with the creative, questioning autonomy of the West.
Oh, absolutely.
But these two philosophies aren't just sitting in isolation anymore. They are crashing into each other because of globalization and the massive push to solve global educational inequality.
The material highlights organizations like UNESCO and their overarching mission of education for all. They are trying to bridge massive access gaps in developing nations caused by poverty, geographical isolation, and gender discrimination.
Right.
And one of the most powerful tools in this globalizing effort is the standardization of curricula.
This is where we see the rise of programs like the International Baccalaureate, the IB program, or the Cambridge curriculum.
These standardized programs solve a massive problem, which is credentialing.
Okay.
If you are a brilliant student in a rural village in Kenya and you get a local high school diploma, a university admissions officer in Toronto or London might not know how to evaluate your transcript. They just don't know the rigor of your local school.
That makes sense.
But if you take the standardized Cambridge exams or earn an IB diploma, that admissions officer knows exactly what competencies you possess. It creates a universal currency for academic achievement. It facilitates immense global mobility.
It basically gives that student a passport to the global economy. But this creates a profound, agonizing tension. The material mentions the fear of cultural erosion.
Yes.
And I really want to push on this. What does this standardization actually mean for the human identity?
A huge question.
If a student in a rural village in India, a student in a skyscraper in Dubai, and a student in a suburb of London are all studying the exact same standardized Cambridge curriculum, reading the exact same historical viewpoints, analyzing the exact same literature, solving the same problems, are we losing the unique cultural soul of education in the name of economic efficiency?
That is the most acute tension of globalization. When you adopt a global standard designed in Geneva or Cambridge, you inevitably sideline the local indigenous context,
Right.
whose history gets taught, whose literature is deemed essential. Standardized curricula offer a ladder out of poverty and access to the global stage. But the toll to climb that ladder is often assimilation.
Well,
The challenge for the next century of education is figuring out how to maintain a globally recognized standard of rigorous competency while fiercely protecting and integrating local cultural identity and history. It is a monumental structural challenge.
we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started at the structural mechanics of how we sort 10-year-olds in Germany. We unpacked the absurd economic realities of a $50,000 tuition bill.
Yeah, we did.
We looked at the sheer exhaustion of the student crucible, the debate over whether forcing a kid to volunteer destroys their empathy, the infrastructure gap of the digital divide, all the way up to the philosophical collision of Eastern mastery versus Western questioning.
You have just absorbed a massive amount of sociological, economic, and structural insight. But passive absorption isn't the goal here. The final section of our outline, and really the ultimate goal of the source material, is about turning these abstract concepts into a practical toolkit.
Right. How do we take everything we just talked about and actively use it in our own lives, our careers, and our conversations?
The material lays out a very specific methodology for structuring thought. The first tool is categorizing vocabulary. When you learn complex ideas, do not just memorize isolated words or facts in a vacuum. You have to build a mental filing system.
How does that work in practice? Like, give me an example.
Imagine you are building a filing cabinet where every concept is cross-referenced. You take terms like financial strain, cognitive load, socioeconomic barriers, and tuition bloat, and you group them into one mental folder.
Right.
You take terms like teacher autonomy, student-centered learning, pedagogical approach, and holistic assessment, and you put them in another. When you are in a meeting or analyzing a news story, pulling one of those files naturally pulls the context of the others. You aren't searching for words, you are deploying an interconnected network of concepts.
I love that. It's functional knowledge. What about argument construction? Because we looked at several heavy debates today, like free college or mandatory volunteering.
The ability to frame a balanced argument is the absolute hallmark of critical thinking. The material emphasizes a specific structure: thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
So can we through it?
Let's take the free higher education debate. If you want to articulate this effectively, you start by establishing the foundational thesis. Education is a public good that creates equal opportunity, so it should be state-funded.
Right.
Then you aggressively explore the antithesis, the counterpoints. It creates massive budget constraints, pulls money from healthcare, and dilutes the value of the degree.
So you prove you actually understand the opponent's logic.
Exactly. And finally, the synthesis, proposing a nuanced middle ground or acknowledging the irreconcilable trade-off. By structuring your thought this way, you move away from emotional reactivity and demonstrate a sophisticated grasp of systemic complexity.
And there's one more highly practical exercise the material suggests that I absolutely love. It's an exercise in constraint.
Oh, the 50-word summary.
Yes. They suggest taking a massive, sprawling topic like the digital divide or the cultural erosion of standardized testing and forcing yourself to summarize its core mechanism in exactly 50 words.
Constraint breeds clarity. When you only have 50 words, you cannot hide behind vague language or meandering sentences. You are forced to choose the most precise verbs and the most accurate nouns. It ruthlessly sharpens both your deep comprehension of the issue and your ability to express it concisely to others.
And here is the real takeaway from all of this. Understanding these facets of education, practicing this vocabulary, structuring these arguments, it doesn't just make you sound smart at a dinner party.
No.
It makes you a more articulate, engaged citizen. It gives you the X-ray vision to look at the world and see that invisible architecture we talked about at the very beginning. You become capable of understanding exactly how your own society is shaped, how the economy is engineered, and how the minds of the people around you are actually wired.
It equips you to engage with the world not as a passive observer, but with profound nuance and clarity. From the foundational structures of childhood to the technological disruptions of AI, these insights really provide a vastly richer appreciation for the lifelong complex machinery of human learning.
Which leads us to a final thought for you to ponder. We talked heavily about the mechanisms of change today. AI tutors that adapt to your brainwaves, virtual reality simulations of the human heart, global digital connectivity.
Yeah.
Considering how rapidly the very architecture of reality is shifting, what do you think the classroom of the future will actually feel like? When the screen can simulate anything and the AI knows everything, how might the physical human experience of gathering to learn completely change in the years ahead?
It is a question that requires us to imagine not just the future of schools, but the future of human connection itself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those big questions, keep unpacking the architecture around you, and as always, stay curious.